And good morning, everybody. Welcome to the TMIC Daily Liberation Meditation. We do this meditation Monday through Fridays each week. And before each meditation, of which we have a couple different varieties, there is a talk on liberation, and much of the subject matter is derived from our whole life architecture workshop, which is a weekly live interactive workshop where we are exploring as a community our own liberation to stand in the power of our inner world as creator, to create our life, to be responsible as creators of our life, to create a life by design versus merely tolerating a life by default as a victim. Most people in our society are victims because they are unliberated from their conditioning. They do not know who they are, so all they can do is be a habituated walking unconscious reaction to everything happening to them from outside themselves, from their outer world, from the world of effects. They have no power as a creator to actually transform and transmute their experience because they are not liberated from their conditioning. So these meditations are designed to provide insights into your liberation so that you can access and activate the creator within. We've been talking over the last couple of days about suffering and the way that we as human beings are in a perpetual state of suffering. It can even be a state that you may get quite comfortable with. We can get really comfortable with our suffering. It's the devil you know idea. But nonetheless, it is still suffering because we are unaligned with our true nature, with our true essence, with our true desires. And unless we are aligned and living from our true essence, and unless we are standing in our power as a creator to create a life by design that aligns with who we actually are, we are in a state of suffering. And what we do with our suffering, as we were discussing yesterday, is we create a lot of stories around our suffering. We, as meaning making machines, we are always looking for ways to make meaning out of suffering that is purely the result of us not being aligned with who we are and not creating our own life, but life seemingly happening to us. Now, as I mentioned yesterday, it doesn't mean that there aren't things that happen that are outside of your control that you may also suffer as a result of. But the power in being able to stay connected to the creator self is that even in situations, extreme situations, I'm thinking of, for example, situations like war. War happens and innocent people suffer. People who had no power in the decision making to go to war. This is one example. And yet, when we are standing in our creator liberated selves, even in those situations, we are able to find transformative power to transmute the situation. A great example of that was, for those of you who've read the book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl, who wrote, "We must never forget that we may also find meaning in life even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed. For what then matters is to bear witness to the uniquely human potential at its best, which is to transform personal tragedy into triumph, to turn one's predicament into a human achievement. When we are no longer able to change a situation, just think of an incurable disease such as an inoperable cancer, and we find we are challenged to then change ourselves. There's two things in this passage from Viktor Frankl's book that I find compelling in the context of how we are creators of our own suffering. Even when an external circumstance like war occurs, what Viktor Frankl found in his studies and in his own experience being in a concentration camp was that there are those who succumbed to the suffering coming from the external world and created an inner world of suffering for themselves by not being a creator of their own existence and own life, but rather by consuming the suffering from without and bringing it within. This is the distinction we talk about in whole life architecture, which is, are you a creator or are you a consumer? And we can consume suffering. As the saying goes, misery loves company. So we can consume outer suffering, suffering from the outer world around which we did not have any say in, like a war, and we can make it our own. We can create the conditions within ourselves by consuming the suffering from the outside so that the suffering then becomes our own. There were those in Viktor Frankl's story in the concentration camp who did that, and his observation was that they ended up getting really sick and dying, or they were just dying from depression, dying from psychosomatic conditions, or dying from actual health conditions, all related to the power of the mind to create the conditions of suffering, to consume it from without, and to bring it within, and then to recursively create those conditions of suffering within themselves over and over and over again until they died. Then there were those who did not consume the suffering from the outside. The concentration camp was still there. The murder and the torture was still there. But they did not succumb to allowing it to penetrate their inner thoughts, to penetrate their inner world, to penetrate their heart. They found a way instead, as creator, to project possibility in the midst of profound suffering, and to find the good in all situations. This is a weird thing for a lot of people. It's strange because people will say, for example, if there is a God, then why does so much suffering occur? And this is a good question. But if you believe that we are on a journey of perpetual openness and liberation and awakening, then all things can be used for the good of our awakening. All things can be used for the good of our strengthening, our creator selves. All things can be used for the good of our becoming. The reason extreme situations like war occur is because we allowed, and this is important, we allowed years and years of misalignment, of non-alignment to occur. And so the unaligned situation got more and more dramatic until eventually it became overwhelming and we're dealing with a war. We're seeing things around the world right now that resemble this. Because when human beings are trapped in their ego and are only consuming the world without and are not creating a new possibility for themselves from within, when human beings are simply victims, gnawing at each other, blaming each other, grifting off of each other, pointing fingers at each other, then we end up in this situation where the suffering starts to increase. It's like, you're not getting the message. Well, let's dial it up a bit and see if this wakes you up. You're not getting it yet. Let's dial it up a bit and see if this wakes you up. Because we're on the path of awakening to ourselves as a creator, as a powerful creator of our own life. The external world becomes the teacher, not the thing to consume, not to consume the suffering, but the teacher to awaken us to our own creative power to create something else. But if we're unwilling to create something else, like we discussed yesterday, if we get trapped in our stories, and we love our stories, we love all of the reasons why we can't, why they're to blame, why I am a victim and it's the world's fault. We love those stories, and the longer we stay trapped in those stories, the more our outer circumstances will continue to ratchet up until we can't bear it anymore. And we finally get to a point where we accept our own power as creator and we start to change things. Viktor Frankl writes in his book, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, and that is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Viktor Frankl was not a special person. He was a normal man who had been through horrific tragedy externally, but was able to radically transform that tragedy into an awakening, into a realization. Even though he was on the brink of despair, it was in that moment that he discovered the power to find love even in the midst of a concentration camp, to create the conditions within himself, not only to find love, but to be love in that moment. It reminds me also of the famous Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who had his own awakening in the midst of the Vietnam War, in the midst of horrific tragedy. War is just an extreme example of an unawakened, victim-based society, group of people who have allowed their society to get to such a level of despair that war is the next phase. We could avoid all of these wars if we only didn't procrastinate and delay the inner work to awaken and to align with ourselves, to become the creator of ourselves. But when we resist and we keep projecting out, blaming others, pointing fingers, grifting, taking advantage of each other, war is the outcome. Because the dance that we are in this dispensation is a dance between our inner world and our outer world. As we always say in whole life architecture, the objective in life is to be in the world, not of the world. The of the world dynamics are the dynamics where we are not standing in our power as a creator, but are rather just consuming the outer world, consuming the rules, the obligations, the perspectives of other people, not creating our own path. The dance is to create your own path and to participate through creative collaboration with others in the outer world. But if you're not creating your own path, and no one is doing this, then the dance becomes one where we start trying to get from each other. We're no longer cooperating, we're competing. And competition, depending on the lens you look through it, it has many merits. It activates this thing inside of us to want to outdo one another and be better. But it does have a ceiling. At some point, the competition becomes toxic. Because if it's not coming from a creator collaborative heart and space, eventually competition leads to taking advantage of one another. And that taking advantage of one another eventually becomes fighting one another. And when we start fighting one another, instead of creating and collaborating, the only logical end result is war. And this is what we're seeing in the world right now. We're seeing a situation where we had many decades where there was sort of peaceful coexistence to a certain degree. There's always been excuse me, war flare-ups around the world. But in the West, at least, we've had a very comfortable period in human history relative to what previous human history looked like since the Second World War. But this is the problem with comfort. You start to assume you have no responsibility to continue creating the next thing that would maintain a situation of ease and grace. We become so addicted to comfort and so avoidant of the discomfort of doing our own inner liberation work that we begin to just consume the external comfortable environment. And it's almost like a form of hypnosis. And so things start to get really static. It's like water, you know, water has to always be running. If you have still water and it's not moving, it's not in action, it's not creating, it's just flat and still, bacteria starts to form, the water becomes toxic and no life can live in it. Our society in the West has become like a still pool where bacteria has formed and it's now become toxic to those living in it. Because we stopped co-creating together. We started competing so much that we saw the other as an enemy, as a threat to our inner comfort. We were so avoidant to becoming uncomfortable in staying connected and aligned to the creator within and doing the work. We avoided that discomfort, and now we've created an uncomfortable outer world as a result. The transformative power and the awakening that happened for the West after the Second World War was one that led to the creation of the United Nations, was one that led to the declaration of never again, was one that led to roughly 80 years of relative peace. And we can see that it is all starting to fracture. And there's no one individually to blame except we ourselves collectively for falling asleep at the wheel and ceasing to be the creators of our own life. We became unliberated. We started to become trapped by the conditions we created, trapped in our own conditioning, trapped in our own perceived greatness, in our own perceived rightness. We became trapped in what we were right about. The West was the best. Democracy is the only political structure possible. Capitalism is the only economic structure possible. We stopped creating and we started consuming and drinking our own Kool-Aid. We stopped getting curious about how we could iterate and evolve what was created after the Second World War and just consumed life. That consumption has led to environmental degradation, plastic, more particles of plastic in the ocean than fish, air pollution. We stopped getting creative. By the time the 1980s came around, the Western world was in full consumption mode. And it's taken roughly 40 years for the pieces of our society to finally start crumbling and falling. So here we are. We can either resist this situation or we can take responsibility for our own part in being a creative collaborator, in being a community builder, in being someone who invites others into dialogue and conversation to begin collaborating and creating again, perhaps before we have to go to the next phase, which is a war. Because that's what's coming as long as we ignore our inner world and are only focused outside. I'm speaking on a macro level right now, but the same applies to us as individuals. You can either live your individual life at war with the world, blaming others, feeling like every day is a fight, is a battle, seeing everything outside yourself as a threat. Or you can begin to transform and transmute your inner world to connect to your creator essence again. You can liberate yourself from your conditioning. The conditioning we all were born into and inherited. It's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. What do we do now? Who are we going to be about it before any doing even occurs? Are we going to connect to the creator within? Are we going to liberate ourselves from all of the things we believe we are right about? This has to be like this. This can't change. When we say things like this, we're just avoiding and resisting the discomfort and effort that creation necessitates. You cannot create when you're comfortable. You cannot create without effort. And so we either accept that or we continue to just consume and languish in perceived comfort until all the walls fall in our life. And so yesterday we went into an observer-watcher meditation and we asked the question, where am I suffering? Where am I attached to my suffering? Where have I got a great story to justify why I should continue suffering in this area of my life? Maybe financially, or in my relationships, or with my health, or with my business. Where are you in complaint and unwilling to go through the discomfort and make the effort to transform and transmute the situation, first by transforming yourself into a creator of something new that's possible in that area of your life? Or where are you just telling yourself stories about why you can't, and all the while ruminating and complaining about it, blaming others, blaming your circumstances, even though those circumstances, like Viktor Frankl's war, may have not been totally within your control? You still have a choice to alter your perception and approach that situation from a place of creator power, liberated creator power, as opposed to mindless, unconscious consumer of the situation. If you're willing to do what it takes, it always takes less. The question is, are you willing to do what it takes? Are you willing to put the effort required to transform your situation? Are you willing to go through the discomfort of letting go of the devil you know? If you can answer yes to any of those questions, then you are on the beginning of the path of liberating yourself from them. And I would invite those who are interested, who may be listening this morning, to explore whole life architecture as a possible community in which you can do that work. But for today, as we move into the Watcher Observer meditation, the same prompt, the same question as yesterday. Where am I suffering, and where am I unwilling to be the liberated creator to transform and transmute that suffering into something new for myself? Even though there will be discomfort, even though there might be disappointment from people in my life, even though it's going to require effort. And by the way, there will be disappointment, because until you're only dealing with and interacting with other liberated creators, people who are attached to their conditioning will look down on you changing things, because change is seen as a threat to the human nervous system until we become liberated creators and learn to embrace change as a way of living and being. Until someone is in that state, any liberated creator person is going to be seen as threatening, disrupting their very well-balanced consumed life. So that's the prompt as we move into the observer watcher meditation. This morning, you can get seated in a comfortable position, taking a few deep cleansing breaths as we prepare to move in it. The observer watcher meditations train us to be able to observe and watch the outer world and our interactions with it without conflating the two, without becoming part of the conditioned world in which we are operating. It allows us to be in the world but not of it. And it begins with being able to observe and watch our own thoughts and our own emotions, to create space and distance between our thoughts and our emotions and ourself. That we are not our thoughts and we are not our emotions, but we can get into a place where we believe we are when we're operating from a consumed life. We even consume our own thoughts and emotions as though they are us. We are in reaction to every thought that crosses our mind, or in reaction to every emotion that bubbles up. We don't even know where they come from anymore. We're so detached from our source essence. So the watcher observer meditation allows us to redevelop that muscle, to know that we are not our thoughts and emotions, that we have thoughts because our brain is a thinking machine. And that's what it does. Just like our heart beats and our lungs breathe, our brain thinks. But our thoughts are not us. And our emotions are trying to guide us. Whenever we experience what we call a negative emotion, that's simply an area of unalignment. It's not something to be repressed or ignored. It's something to be fully felt and observed, so that we can glean the wisdom from it and make alterations to how we are living our life and who we are being in it. But in order to do that, we have to separate ourselves from our thoughts and from our emotions and be able to see clearly the distinction. And that's what this meditation is good for. In the back of your mind, as you're meditating, as you're just watching your thoughts, observing your emotions, they may drift by in your mind's eye like clouds in the sky. You can have in the back of your mind the question or the prompt, where am I in suffering in my life? Where am I attached to the story? Where do I feel like I'm at a loss of power? I am a victim to a situation or circumstance. And what am I unwilling to do? What effort and what discomfort am I unwilling to go through in order to rectify that? And can I stand in my power as a creator and take that step, knowing that the energy of my entire life will shift the moment I do? New possibilities will emerge, possibilities you can't see in your particular circumstance or situation. Transformation always begins with the first challenging, difficult step, to move from the comfort of the known to the discomfort of the unknown. You can have that prompt in the back of your mind as we move into our meditation this morning. So for the next few minutes, you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions. There's nothing to do. There's no action to take other than observe and watch. And see if you can glean some insights from your higher self about where you are trapped, where you are unliberated, where you are consuming suffering in your life. I'll see you all in a few minutes. And welcome back, everybody. Reconnecting to the world without from the world within. And as we move into our day, into the world without, stay connected to the insights that you may have had this morning on those areas of suffering that you are creating for yourself by being unwilling to move through the discomfort and put in the effort required to create something new. The discomfort and the effort that is always present with change. And yet, to be a creator and to be liberated, to be able to flow like water through life, requires being at total peace and surrender with perpetual change. For to transform is to change. And if we are resistant to change, we cannot simultaneously speak of transformation in any meaningful way. Suffering is the prison or the trap that we create for ourselves because of our unwillingness to change, to transform. And this is a choice. Whatever insight you gleaned this morning around the area of your suffering, explore for yourself whether you have such a resistance, such an unwillingness to transform it, to change. And see if you can start nudging at the edges of that, to be able to move from the static stuckness of a stale pond to the life-flowing waters of change and movement, that transformation. Can you let go of the I can't because? All the while, that area of suffering is suffocating you. That's what I'll leave you with this morning as we move out into our day. We will continue our work tomorrow.